It was hose day, which is when the prisoners received their antibacterial showers. If everything went as planned, the only ones about to get hosed were the alien captors. The adanauts' intention to escape the space prison was to be executed today. Dr. Mantis had carefully gone over the preparations and arrangements and was solidly confident in the plan that he and Lexa, in cooperation with the other captives, had cooked up, so to speak. He woke that morning incredibly optimistic. He and Lexa stood in the cooking area of the safe house. Today was Dr. Mantis's turn to mix and form the nutrients for the daily luncheon at the prison. The timing and coordination of everything to do with this caper had worked out perfectly. Instead of the regular colorless and odorless balls of gloppity goop that the aliens ate daily, Dr. Mantis and Lexa formed today's sustenance in strips, which were colored in the 7 hues found in the spectrum of natural light. When completed, on the tray, they looked like brilliantly colored rainbow Rice Krispie treats. Once the goods were fully prepared, Dr. Mantis and Lexa gathered the trays and an instrument for cutting the prepared goods for distribution. The instrument was shiny and sharp, and closely resembled what we know on Earth to be a machete. Once everything was securely fastened inside the terrestrial transportation vehicle, Dr. Mantis and Lexa gave each other an alien fist bump, a wink and a nod, and Dr. Mantis headed to space prison as he did every other ordinary day. When Dr. Mantis arrived at the space prison, he gathered a hovering cart from the supply room and guided it to his vehicle, which was situated very close to the main doors of the prison. The red-horned giant and 3 rust-colored minions that originally escorted Adam to his first inspection accompanied Dr. Mantis and assisted him with loading up the day's meal. The 5 engaged in small talk, and Dr. Mantis explained that he made a very special treat that would break the monotony of their daily nutrient ritual. The fellow aliens seemed excited by this news, because even though these gobs have been their primary source of nourishment since as far back as anyone could remember, everyone hated the bland appearance and tastelessness. As 2 of the minions guided the hover tray, the 5 of them together headed into the large gray room with high ceilings and placed the trays of rainbow-colored substance on the table for preparation. Dr. Mantis began slicing the daily meal into strips, which were about 2 inches wide. Each strip contained a perfectly equal portion of the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet segments. The machete seemed to cut through them like warm butter. A small crowd began to gather around the doctor as he continued to divide the composition into the edible-sized pieces. Even the judge came in and seemed impressed by what the doctor had concocted. Everyone seemed to be looking forward to lunch. The day continued rather routinely, and the guards made their normal rounds and inspections as the doctors conducted appropriate examinations. There seemed to be more than nominal chatter, both audibly and telepathically by the staff of the prison, and most of the discussion seemed to revolve around this new and different form of nutrition. The day continued, and finally the time had come when the prison's double buzzer sounded. This was an indication for all alien forms to report to the large gray room for feeding time. The speed at which the prison staff moved toward the cafeteria seemed more expeditious than it had been on any other day. The anticipation of something different was the culprit. Dr. Mantis was responsible for serving the meal on this day. He would use the instrument to slide underneath the individual strips and slide each piece onto the colorful, waiting hands of his co-workers. Each took the strip to their seats inside the large room, which echoed with each metallic sound of the serving instrument hitting the tray. Nobody was permitted to eat until everyone was served. The staff sat patiently awaiting the last serving to be presented. A single buzzer sounded, and everyone began eating their out-of-the-ordinary treat. The aliens were raving about this new form of nutrition, and many were making yum sounds which confirmed their delight. After hearing the loud double buzzer minutes ago, the adanauts in their cells knew that it was time to move, since the captors had all been summoned to mealtime. The 5 adanauts leaped into action, and as they were previously directed, reached under the shiny metal tables in their individual cells to gather the narrow packages that were left by Dr. Mantis. Their opening was simultaneous. There were 4 things in each package. The first was a handwritten note. The second was a tan fleshy material. The third was a small vial of a clear liquid. And the fourth was a small metallic incendiary device. None of the adanauts had even a remote clue of what these items were, so referred to the note for instruction. The direction for Zeke, being of primitive mind, had to be depicted by images rather than words. The rest of the notes had been prepared in English, and by this time, through Dr. Mantis's tutelage, each of the other captives have been able to grasp the fundamentals of the English language. As handwritten by Dr. Mantis, the notes read, 1. Remove the tan square-shaped fleshy material. 2. Open the vial of clear liquid and spill it onto the fleshy material. 3. Place the moistened flesh against the storage cell's biometric window. It will open. The fleshy material that was contained within each of the envelopes was a skin sample that was freshly removed from Dr. Mantis's spinal region by Lexa on the day of delivery. The vials were filled with Dr. Mantis's saliva. When combined, the two samples provided enough of a biological signature to open the cabinets inside the individual chambers. Everyone now was in their cells with access to the compartments used by the guards for storage. Once the sections of the cells used for storage were opened, each member of the team again referred to their notes. They continued reading as Zeke interpreted the imagery to the best of his ability. The next set of directions were, remove the false front of the compartment by sliding it sideways. It will fold like an accordion. Find the small pencil-shaped pungent-smelling object and place it between your lips. Take the metallic incendiary device and press the red button and it will ignite. Then, light the end of the spliff that is now in your mouth. Begin to inhale and repeat the process until it is halfway gone. When you hear the second double buzzer, put on the enclosed face coverings and clothing items, and wait for the guards to arrive to escort you. You will know what to do then, adanauts. Adam thought to himself, what the hell kind of plan is this? He was absolutely outraged by it, and could not believe that this escape that was to be so monumental was reduced to him getting blazed. He thought back to his conversations with Dr. Mantis and revisited them. He trusted the doctor, but this seemed like nonsense. Figuring they wouldn't make it out if this was the planned course of action, Adam sat back and enjoyed the joint in the strange alien-formed version of himself. The second double buzzer sounded, which meant that the guards were going to be coming to gather the prisoners for cleaning. The noise also indicated that the adanauts needed to further prepare with a greater sense of urgency, with each of the conspirators feeling slightly euphoric and trusting Dr. Mantis. They all did as they had been instructed and started putting on the masks and clothing that had been hidden in their cells. Back in the mess hall, the entirety of the staff of the alien prison had finished partaking of the daily sustenance. Every one of them were incredibly complimentary to Dr. Mantis for coming up with something different, which brought joy to a remarkably unjoyful place. Dr. Mantis accepted the compliments graciously. Little did the prison staff know, though, that the nutrients they had just consumed contained a super strain of hydroponic cannabinoid that was given the name ROYGBIV. It had been developed by Zeke and Dr. Mantis, and was designed to produce effects that are exponentially greater than any other strain of cannabinoid that man ever knew. For this to be used on alien life forms that have zero tolerance to any form of cannabis was going to be something to behold. The composition of the nutrients that the prison staff ingested also contained a time release element, which would delay the effects for approximately half hour's Earth time. None of the consumers had any clue what was about to unfurl. As status quo dictated, the guards assigned to retrieve the prisoners for cleansing began to make their way down the long metallic corridor to the cells where the adanauts had been imprisoned. When they were about halfway down the long corridor, Dr. Mantis yelled, "Wait!" He ran back to the eating quarters where he would secure the machete. The guards were confused and looked strangely at Dr. Mantis as he ran back, now holding a machete and running in this uncoordinated, accelerated gait. The guards continued walking toward the cells, feeling more and more strange by the passing of each moment. When they arrived in front of their assigned cells, the doors to each simultaneously opened. The guards were riveted by what they saw in each of the units. There stood the prisoners, who no longer resembled the versions of themselves which the guards came to know so well through countless visitations and inspections. Now, they all appeared drastically different and somewhat alarming to the unexpected lookers-on. Appropriately, Zeke wore an ape mask and had large cat eyes. He was dressed in a strange rainbow-paneled puffy jacket. Alvin was donning a handlebar mustache and had a gold halo floating above his head. He was also wearing a tank top with a dark green pickle on it. Chester wore a dog mask and was in an orange prison jumpsuit. Igor had a single large bug eye and stood bare-chested in his abnormally small frame. Around his waist, he sported a large inflatable pink flamingo raft that you would find at a community pool. Adam wore a chicken mask and a shirt that looked like a Detroit Red Wings jersey. All stood perfectly still, staring at the guards. The guards stared back for several moments in silence. The figures they saw before them looked more unnatural than anything that any of them had ever seen. A minute or so later, a couple of the guards began to giggle. Then suddenly, the chicken dance song that you hear at weddings began to play loudly over the speaker system, and the adanauts began doing the appropriate dance steps to the timing of the song. The guards began to laugh uncontrollably and were now feeling the intense euphoria brought on by the engineered strain of cannabis that they were coaxed into eating. Sensing the commotion and hearing the loud foreign music playing throughout the facility, the other prison staff members began running toward the disruption. But as they continued their trek, they also began to feel the intense effects of what laced their daily nutrition intake. They too began to laugh hysterically as the adanauts now began to chicken dance their way out of their confinement and up and down the corridor. The guards watched in amazement as their eyes began to roll toward the sides of their heads and change patterns similar to that which Adam witnessed in Dr. Mantis's eyes just the other day. All the adanauts' eyes and those of the alien prison staff were now swirled in patterns like those found on many bowling balls. During all the ruckus, Dr. Mantis entered Adam's cell and grabbed the captain's jacket out of the compartment. The article of clothing resembled Captain Kirk's shirt from the hit series on Earth entitled Star Trek. He proudly wore it as he meandered through the bodies strewn across the floor, which were agonizing in their own laughter. The hilarity of the aliens was now harmonizing in a high-pitched shriek, which was audibly as loud as the music itself. All the while this madness is transpiring inside the prison walls, Lexa has now entered the property upon which the facility is located and begun her work. Months ago in Earth's time, Alvin, Zeke, and Dr. Mantis had engineered an herbal and elemental substance which was composed of a methane base. Lexa transported it to the prison in her flying machine, which was now camouflaged as the Predator camouflaged himself in the movie series. She and her spacecraft were perfectly blended into her surroundings. She rested the craft outside of the northernmost prison wall, where the ventilation system was exhausted. Lexa then prepared the herbal methane compound and situated it under the exhaust, which she has now reversed to intake. The methane compound began to produce an exorbitant amount of gas, which was sucked into the prison. The gas was infiltrating the entirety of the facility through the holes located in each of the individual cell floors and throughout the prison. The reefer that had been previously consumed by the adanauts at the inception of the plan contained a substance that blocked their cell receptors, thus not allowing any harmful effects of this compound to attach to their cells. Simply put, this gas could be safely exhaled through normal breathing by the adanauts. However, it wasn't that simple for the prison staff, and with each inhalation, they were breathing an extremely hazardous and flammable gas composition. This gas compound pumped throughout the prison also contained a finely tuned herbal aphrodisiac and contained other properties that would induce vomiting. As the alien staff began to breathe in this mist, they started to become very amorous toward each other. So now, they are not only rolling around on the floor laughing uncontrollably, but they are also starting to make Google eyes at their androgynous and asexual co-workers. The more the aphrodisiac sets in, the more demonstrative they become toward one another. They look into each other's eyes and grow more loving with every breath. By this time, the adanauts are all solidly high, but still have their faculties about them. They have now started laughing at the behaviors of their captors as they continue marching up and down the corridors, still doing the chicken dance as the music continues to resonate throughout the hallways. As the madness escalates, the full effects of the gas start to settle in, and as the alien creatures continue to laugh heartily and rub up against each other, they have also now begun vomiting. The vomit being emitted is not akin to that which we on Earth are accustomed to, but it is being regurgitated in rainbow strips as if it were taffy pouring out of their mouths. As minutes pass, more of the captors are continuing the chain reaction, and they are all now laughing in stitches, rubbing themselves and their co-workers and spewing rainbow-like ribbons of vomit that smell like blueberries all over each other, themselves, and the hallways. Dr. Mantis is the only one not under the influence, but is thoroughly enjoying the spectacle that is unfolding before him. Although he didn't smoke, he ingested a serum that contained the same blockers that prevent cell receptors from receiving the harmful compositions of the gas that is being breathed by the inhabitants of the prison. Dr. Mantis grows more bitter, and although each of the adanauts seems to be having fun, Mantis thinks back to the reasons why everyone was put in this place to begin with, and what horrors the adanauts have sustained since being captive. Each one of the individuals he has grown to care about has been removed from his family and time period of existence, and essentially had their lives as they know them terminated. His bitterness festers even as he watches the comedic performance unfolding before him. He reaches to his hip and grabs the machete, which he had tucked in a sling along his gangly leg. Without a second thought, he passed it to Chester's waiting purple hands and asked him to wait. Chester performed a very thorough inspection of his newly found potential instrument of destruction and immediately fell madly in love. He inspected every inch, but honored the request to wait. As the doctor scampered back to the eating facility to change the music playing from the chicken dance to Karl Orff's O Fortuna, the good doctor returned, and before the music could begin, he slid a tall podium that had been used for training purposes within the facility to the front of the corridor. His lanky and tanned figure slowly and methodically climbed the 2 steps, and he now stood at the front of the corridor above all else. All attention of the captors and captives is now pointed at Dr. Mantis. He mysteriously waves his hands as if to show he has nothing in them or up his sleeves. A conductor's baton magically appeared in his clammy and long fingers. He stood face first toward all of the ongoing chaos, and with a simple nod to Chester and with a single tap of the baton against the metallic podium, the music begins. Chester's lips begin to lose color and quiver as the music grew heavier and deeper. The angered purple figure took the appropriate cue from the doctor and began traversing the corridor of gyrating aliens, throwing up on themselves, and indiscriminately began to behead every alien within reach. He found himself engaged in such magnificent violence to the beat and rhythm of the music, which was seemingly being conducted by Dr. Mantis. As the alien body parts were severed, streams of blood, similar in color to the vomit, began to flow through the hallways. During Chester's rampage, Adam and Zeke seemed to be triggered by the overwhelming thoughts and emotional damage resultant of their captivity. This seemed to initiate their entry into the frenzy of violence as well. In his new, less impressive slender alien figure, Adam relied on the techniques and training of his martial arts background and begun landing spinning back fists, elbows, heel kicks, and a multitude of other attacks on the jailers. Zeke grabbed a dark brown severed limb that reminded him of his club from home and started bludgeoning each of the guards and doctors that were still moving. Seeing the assassin's ability to work together was a spectacular form of art. At one moment, Chester let out a few guttural roars and yelled,
"Wah! I missed cutting off heads! Ah!"
Their mission became far more personal. While the alien captors were being dismembered and beaten, they continued to laugh in hysterics as they also continued to suffer from the effects of the involuntary received aphrodisiac. Amidst the pandemonium, the adanauts would periodically exchange glances with each other throughout the process, as they worked seamlessly together to systematically destroy many of those who held them in captivity. While the havoc persisted, Dr. Mantis reveled in his own madness as he continued to feel at one with the music and the bedlam going on around it. Igor and Alvin remained non-violent and chuckled, while they continued to partake in smoking the remaining cannabis and intently watching as the other adanauts went down an unforgivable path of destruction, passing out high fives and exchanging embraces along the way. The 3 perpetrators of the intense violence finished taking out their liberties on the hapless victims as the song that Dr. Mantis was conducting came to a delightfully demented end. From the podium, Dr. Mantis drew in a very deep breath. He tilted his head back and gently closed his enormous bulbous eyes for more than a standard second as he marveled in the majesty of violence that sat before him. At this point, the hallways were covered in rainbows from ceiling to floor as lifeless and colorful bodies laid scattered about. Now that the music had stopped, and many of the abductors remained partially or fully incapacitated on the corridor floor, Dr. Mantis motioned to his Adanaut team to follow, and together they navigated around the broken bodies as they made their way to the northernmost corridor where Lexa had her craft situated. Unchallenged and unmatched, the Adanauts confidently strolled toward the exit in a manner reminiscent of the scene from Reservoir Dogs, where the team walked together, shoulder to shoulder. As they exited the facility, they celebrated the exodus, and each grew more relieved and happier to be out of Space Prison. Their lips showed the emotion, and as some darkened, others lightened as they were overtaken by joy. In a short moment, they were greeted with hugs from Lexa, and they all entered the vehicle, which was now visible to their eyes. As Lexa started flying the craft, the flame of the thruster, which was situated against the ventilation system, lit the gas compound that was being pumped into the prison. As they sped off before the incident could be reported, they all turned to watch as the entirety of the prison was ignited and blown to smithereens, along with all the life forms that remained within it. Lexa's spacecraft sped off in the direction of the safe house, which was located 1/4 of the way across the planet. Adam tapped her on the shoulder and asked, "Where are the roads?" The only reply from Lexa was,
"Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads."
Only Adam understood her remark.